So today, Mark Kennedy will interview Bob Zoellick on current global affairs and on his new book, America and the World, A History of U.S. Diplomacy and Foreign Policy. Zoellick's book reflects his time as a leader in public policy and demonstrates the belief that the United States is an exceptional, ongoing experiment, both at home and in international relations, that should serve a larger purpose.
To kick off, tell us, why did you write the book?
So when I was in government in those various positions that Schuyler mentioned over a number of administrations, I drew upon history when I was trying to think through problems. And so I wanted to encourage others, particularly those of next generation, to think in those terms. Many foreign policy courses these days, as the students and perhaps some of the professors know well, often focus on international relations theories. And while those are interesting to debate and to understand, I found that they often weren't of such use when I was dealing with issues such as German unification or trade strategy or China policy or genocide in Darfur or World Bank and development. And what I wanted to do through this book was to tell stories about individuals over some 200 years with practical problem solving. There's a certain optimism about history offering insights on how to do better as opposed to timeless obstacles.
Talk about, how do you sum up American foreign policy, our approach to the world? You say that if you did it in one word, it would be pragmatic. Can you elaborate on what is the degree to which pragmatism is at the heart of American foreign policy?
So there's a real interest in the results, what works, means and ends. And so applying that to diplomacy, you have to begin with close attention to the realities on the ground. And that often starts with power relations. They can be military, it can be economic, technology. Sometimes it's gathering votes, including in international organizations. You have to be alert to processes and institutions. How do things actually get done? Not just discussing the theories of what you might wish, the ideals. You need to know the positions of others and their interests if you're going to be able to either negotiate or put together coalitions. There's always the role of chance and contingency, which is part of the pragmatic philosophy as well as diplomacy, and recognizing the world's a deeply uncertain place. Timing is very important, when to act, when not to act. And I suppose going back on the theme about learning from history, that imperfect results in a far from perfect world could still be a pretty good day. One other aspect that I've often been involved with, and I know you've had an interest in, is the connection of aid and trade. So how you can help countries be able to, whether humanitarian or build their private sector, or develop institutions, fight corruption, but also connect them to the international trading system, because you saw first in East Asia and then around the world how trade was important in development. When one thinks about the broader issues of climate or pandemics or development, you will inevitably find an aid component. And then the challenge over the years is, how do you combine this with local ownership for development? Because development doesn't work unless the local people feel that it's their projects. How do you deal with the corruption issues? How do you try to have higher standards? And how do you make sure that you're bringing together other resources, including from the private sector?
You know, I'd like to talk about the 5 traditions you identify that have emerged from America's encounters with the world. These are the importance of North America, the special role trading, transnational, and technology relations play in defining our ties to others, changing attitudes towards alliances, and ways of ordering connections among states, the needs for public support, especially through Congress, and the belief that American policy should serve a larger purpose. In discussing North America, I don't believe it's fully understood how having friendly neighbors like Canada and Mexico is such a huge advantage to US's ability to act in the world. Help us understand why the North American continent as a whole is so important and how we're stronger together.
Came across a speech that Ronald Reagan gave in 1979 as he was just launching his presidential campaign. And he said that the United States would be better off if our neighbors, Mexico and Canada, were stronger, And he said, it's time we stop thinking about our nearest neighbors as foreigners, which is pretty different from what we've heard over the past few years. But if you would try to think about it today, to me, it's not only an issue about North America alone, it's seeing North America as the continental base for the United States, as well as Mexico and Canada, in a global environment.
You quote his paper, Science, the Endless Frontier, in which he wrote, scientific progress is one essential key to our security as a nation, to our health, to more jobs, to a higher standard of living, and to our cultural progress. We don't often think of technology as a central element of US foreign policy, but it has been since Vannevar Bush's time. Help us understand how technology, what role that plays in foreign policy and our strength in the world.
What Bush is trying to do is to recognize that science is critical to broader national security, but he wants a place for mavericks and independent thinkers. He doesn't want just sort of a bureaucratic control. He's trying to sort of meld those two in an effective system. And in my view, this ends up being quite important with our competition with the Soviet Union in the Cold War. While I think US has been an exceptional country, that's a phrase that sometimes raises the hackles of others that also think they're exceptional. But there's no doubt that there is a notion in the United States from the founding that there's a larger purpose to be served. And my favorite anecdote for this is, for those of you that still carry cash, someday take out a dollar bill and look on the back of the dollar bill. You'll see the Great Seal of the United States. And on the reverse of that, you probably never gave it much attention, you'll see this unfinished pyramid. And notice it's unfinished, with the Eye of Providence above it and the phrase below, Novus Ordo Seclorum. So that's New Order of the Ages. So from the very start, founders of the United States were trying to think about what was the larger purpose of this country, not only within its territory, but in the international system.
We have a question here. What advice do you have for students interested in international relations and diplomacy as a career? What advice would you have for them, Bob?
Try to pick your boss. And this is going to sound odd because, of course, you think your boss picks you, and your boss, of course, does partly pick you. But what I mean by that is, in my experience, I learned a tremendous amount from the people who I was working with. And it didn't mean that I had to like everything about them or to have model myself after them in every different way. But I learned a heck of a lot. And in particularly on the public sector side, if you can find yourself in a position where you're working for someone, if you can think about how you can help that person do his or her job. So as opposed to thinking, gee, what do I think should be done? Try to understand what they need to get their job done. And that has an interesting effect, which is you're starting to think like the decision maker because you're helping the decision maker, and it's a greater chance that you'll become the decision maker.